everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is John Hines. I'm the Senior Director for Lumen Enterprise across Asia, Pacific and Japan, and I'll be moderating today's session. It's a pleasure to welcome you all, and thank you all very much for your time being with us today. Joining me today, we have a couple of great presenters and colleagues and cyber experts. We have Brad Watson, who's the CEO of Aquila Group. Brad's one of Australia's leading crisis management experts with deep real-time experience across cybersecurity, disaster recovery, as well as counter-terrorism. He's the founder of the Aquila Group and leads business continuity, crisis management, cybersecurity programs designed for large-scale technical organizations. And so, Brad, welcome to you. Also joining us, we have our very own Yi Yang. So Yi Yang's with Lumen Technologies. Yi Yang's a seasoned cyber security leader as well as enterprise architect. He has over 25 years experience across law enforcement, critical infrastructure, finance, telecommunications, as well as government sectors. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, John.
Good to be here.
Yeah, the same. And thank you everybody for joining us and allowing us the privilege of being able to chat with everyone.
All right, I might just cover quickly who is Lumen Technologies, a little bit about us before we start. So we're a US headquartered $15 billion company. We operate across 60 countries with a global team of about 28,000 employees. In fact, 3,500 of those are based here in Asia Pacific. We operate 8 security operations centers around the world and serve about 2,500 customers with them. We have SOCs in Melbourne, in Singapore, in Tokyo, as well as in India, and provide global coverage as well with our SOCs in the United States. We have a dedicated threat intelligence organization called Black Lotus Labs. And we use our expansive global networks to provide threat intelligence and threat indicators fed into these SOCs and threat intelligence services for our customers as well. And with that, Brad, I might pass to you just to give us an overview of Aquila Group.
Thanks, John. As you can see there, started the company in 2020. And we've grown across Australia. So we're headquartered here in Brisbane, and this is where we started from, but we've expanded into Sydney, Melbourne, and soon to Canberra. And we also have a number of international clients that we're working closely with, and hopefully soon we'll be expanding our international offices. As you can see, we do a range of activities or business streams, but they're all intricately connected. The cybersecurity and digital transformation, and in particular with our partnership with Lumen Technologies in providing SOC services and supply chain risk management capabilities, and the business optimization. So as you restructure or uplift or transform a cyber division of an organization, that does involve a number of business optimization processes and organizational change. And we do quite a lot of crisis management, mentoring, response activities, but also exercises across the all hazards. And one of those certainly being the cybersecurity incident response and crisis management activities.
All right, thank you. Let's jump into it. So today's session is really about supply chain risk management, but also the impacts and consequences of artificial intelligence and what impacts that has from a supply chain risk perspective. With that, we might jump into the first question. So the first question is, how do you build a security posture on agentic AI? If you have a think, everybody's talking about AI. If you have a look, supply chain risk management is a big issue for organizations and continues to be so. Organizations are struggling from a supply chain risk management perspective. Our advice obviously is to look at it from a platform and programmatic approach as opposed to having organizations come in and sort of audit your supply chain once a year. Then layered across that is the complexity of, AI deployments, AI as threat actors and so forth. So, gentlemen, how would you build a security posture on agentic AI?
As new threats comes forward with the ever-increasing usage of AI, and later on I think there's going to be some questions that's being asked on that, but governance is key, right? At the end of the day, human beings are being made accountable for any kind of outcomes that AI agent produces now. So from that perspective, right, there's always frameworks. Now there's an ISO 42001 in which Lumen is certified for, provides that human intervention and the frameworks around that. And what they call intervention is ultimately before an agent goes out and does anything. Obviously, you don't want it to do anything that's catastrophic, but at the same time, you want it to be autonomous to a certain point. And that autonomy is whether the level of risk that an organization wants to take. So it depends on the risk appetite of the organization as well. So the security posture should actually be based on that framework of 42001. Along with other controls as well. You think about the controls that is required to actually build an LLM, in terms of how you want it to be shared, how segregated you want it away from your customers, your third-party suppliers, your internal folks that's using the LLM, and the agents that go access information from there, and the prompts that comes out of it needs to be governed from that 42001 framework. That's my point of view, right? In terms of segregation, zero trust approach, and as well as the 42001, in order for us to build and measure the security posture of AI.
No, absolutely. I have to 100% agree that one of the key, or one of the top priorities, is actually what governance structure you put through. I mean, agentic AI is a fundamental shift in the way that the conventional or generative AI has actually been. And without the right governance processes put in place, without the right controls, without the right risk mitigation aspects taken into consideration, you will easily lose control of the platform, because the way it operates is just so fundamentally different now, and operates at a speed that the human element is actually having problems keeping up with now. So in the aspects of the security posture, if we look at that particular aspect in this case, it also significantly increases the attack platform that becomes available as well. So if we're looking at the governance and the controls and everything, that is in around controlling the capability, but it does increase the attack surface and the unknown quantities or the unknown aspects that can be identified, and the vulnerabilities that then exposes it to. So that's the aspect as well. You need to be able to map your entire ecosystem, and you need to have very good confidence in the map of your systems, and know exactly what's connected to what before you release such a capability as the agentic AI platforms.
And yeah, I mean, governance is absolutely key. I think we've seen a lot of AI deployments where that planning up front and then that governance piece don't exist. You're opening yourself up to potential compromise. I mean, there's a couple of big challenges. One is, what data are you putting in? How is that being used and potentially manipulated or poisoned? How do you sort of guarantee the efficacy of the data that's in there with the outputs that's kind of coming back out? How do you know it's not being poisoned or manipulated in some form or another that's going to change the outcome of whatever that AI agent is doing for you? And I think we've seen a couple of examples of some large language models that have been kind of poisoned, along the way. And then there's all sorts of examples out there. I know that in the US there was an automotive kind of blogger that was able to manipulate the chatbot of a large US car manufacturer to the point where it offered him a $50,000 car for $1, and also had language in there that it's a legally binding offer, and those sorts of things. So there's dozens of those sorts of stories, and again, I think they were probably super keen to kind of jump on the bandwagon and didn't have that governance in place, which is obviously critical. So yeah, interesting. All right, if we move to the next question. How do you see companies managing agentic AI attacks on supply chain? So more supply chain specific question.
Right now, I would say a majority of the supply chain vendors can't manage it. The brutal truth is they're trying to work that out at the moment, and their security the security apparatuses or mechanisms that they have in place, I'd say most of them actually can't handle the rapid evolving AI attacks that are occurring, especially the agentic AI attacks. And that's the brutal truth, is that I don't think they're actually managing it well right now. But I know some of whether it's government and private sector are actually in the process of deploying, if we say an agentic AI cybersecurity posture capabilities. I must admit I'm seeing mixed results on that at the moment with the different platforms that they're using. But I think that's an evolving thing right at this second.
Yeah, I agree with that, Brad. And your observations are correct, right? You think about the speed. You talk about speed, and it's almost impossible for us to actually contain, in terms of AI, the level of reasoning that the engine has got within AI, right? The algorithms that goes on. So we may not be able to match that speed, but what we can do is we can improve and use AI to counter that the vulnerability, right? Like, for example, remember in the old days that we used to do like point in time posture management, and we do an audit and then we walk away, and then another 6 months we come in for another audit. That obviously won't work anymore. So essentially now there has to be a way. I'm sure there is an approach where we continuously monitor the likes of APIs that's traversing in between our suppliers and the supply chain, making sure that there's no anomalies there, making sure that there's no kind of AI initiated, for example, brute force attacks and identities that move back and forth that are essentially might be AI agents behind it, but it needs to be validated and verified. Those authentication systems on real time will need to be in place in order for us to match the machine speed of AI.
Yeah, and it's got to be taken as a risk management approach. I mean, like the joint capability we have, Aquila, Lumen, and Secure Forte, that the supply chain risk management platform. Very powerful AI tool, 24/7 monitoring across an organization's entire supply chain ecosystem, all the way down to fourth party, and it's constantly monitoring. Right, that working in conjunction with an organization's advanced or agentic AI cybersecurity posture as well, it creates a multi-layered, right? Even the external perimeter of risk detection, identifying which supply chain ecosystem or supply chain entity may be an attractive target, what's actually emerging in the dark web, in the normal internet, what other, all the other feeds that we get into that platform. So trying to be preemptive or predict which organisations within the supply chain could actually be targeted and for what particular reasons as well. So doing that preemptive aspect, analytical work, as well as the multi-layer, the old defence in depth principles. Remember back to those days. Organisations have actually got to have those externally and internally to their own organisation, and they've got to go. And so the prime or the customer with their supply chain ecosystem, they have to do greater assurance of their supply chain to make sure that supply chain meets the standards that are required.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key there is that sort of continuous monitoring piece. I mean, if organizations still do this today, but a lot of organizations will manage their supply chain risk through, a bunch of questionnaires being sent to a bunch of
point in time.
Point in time. And notwithstanding that, sometimes those members of the supply chain are not necessarily tech savvy. They're ticking a bunch of boxes saying they do a bunch of things that, maybe they don't. And to your point, that's point in time. And then 3 months later, maybe they outsource a bunch of stuff to the Philippines. Maybe they divest part of their business. Maybe they put a bunch of stuff in the cloud. That snapshot and that point in time is kind of history now, and you're exposed and vulnerable from that perspective. Whereas taking that platform-based approach that is continuously monitoring 24/7, gives you that kind of real-time insights in terms of what's happening with your supply chain. So, yeah, thanks, gentlemen. If we could move to the next question. All right. So what is the impact of AI data centers and NeoCloud on supply chain cyber risk? And are cyber attacks becoming more prevalent and pronounced?
That everyone is talking about, oh wow, it's really heavily, it's heavy and it's intensive. It's taking a lot of workloads, of which the normal data centers wouldn't be able to meet the expectations. So in comes NeoCloud or AI data center, AI specific workloads data center. So I see the risk that is number one is the resiliency risk, right? It's, for example, if you are faced with not only cyber attacks is one thing. If there's a let's say a physical attack risk on those data centers, what will happen to those workloads? If it's critical infrastructure workloads that's dependent on that data center, what is the resilience around that, right? So it's definitely impacting. It's a good impact in such a way that AI agents are left to do its efficiencies. Autonomous agents are doing its own coding for critical infrastructure. But what if those NeoCloud infrastructures are being compromised from a cyber attack perspective? When you talk about cyber attack, it might be resiliency as well. So during an outage, for example, how quick would they be brought back up to speed for critical infrastructure custodians to continue functioning? So that's a question, and I know there's a big risk behind it. Brad, what are your thoughts?
A little bit of a different approach, and I agree what you've just said, Yang, very much so. But also, I think we're at a point now where organisations need to spend a lot more time on not only planning but rehearsing and putting in place their business continuity side of the house. Because yes, as someone in a former life that would target supply chains, working for the government, Australian government, whether it's an army context or ASD or anything like that, supply chains were certainly of a big interest to us in various forms. And looking at how to exploit, looking at how to disrupt and manipulate those supply chains is a key issue. So certainly data centers and the NeoCloud and all the like are prime targets for that. So, and as more of your supply chain ecosystem moves to those environments, they have to look at, all right, what is so as a prime, as a customer, and you're looking at your supply chain, part of your assessment process is, all right, what is actually your business continuity? How can you continue to deliver your services to me if wherever your data is being stored is disrupted? If your capabilities are taken offline, your digital capabilities taken offline, how can you still provide your avenues from? Who else can provide that to me as a backup? So that's where I actually take that little bit of a different thinking to there. Are the cyber attacks becoming more prevalent and pronounced? Look, as we move to different technologies, attacks will occur and numbers will increase as the attack vectors become more prevalent. But even going back to the old analog days when back to when we first got computer systems, when we first had the dial-up modems and everything like that, we had attacks. So by comparison, are they becoming more frequent and prevalent? Yes, but as technology evolves, that's going to happen. Are they becoming more pronounced? I would actually say in the aspect of, particularly with the Agentic AI being used as part of the attack process, I think the impacts are more serious now, because as we move more and more of the business lines to the digital age, into the clouds, into the areas that can actually, if you hit, the ramifications are more significant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it all basically lean towards the resiliency side of things,
Yeah.
right? How fast you can get it back, and if your supply chain, as in my point of view, if your supply chain is highly dependent on the likes of NeoClouds, and if they go offline, what is the impact on the supply chain, and what is the SLA towards your business as well? So that needs to be taken into consideration as a risk. So
yeah, and certainly, and even the ability to respond to attack. If we look at the incident response and crisis management world, most organisations run their response in whether it's a Teams-based environment or whatever. But if that's taken out, how do they actually convert to or transition to a manual process? So most organisations don't know how to do that. So you're exactly right, Yang. As the organisations are moving, as they're using the digital aspects like the NeoCloud and whatever, they have to be able to still operate, and they have to still be able to respond in an alternate mechanism, whether it's a manual process or some sort of redundancy process anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, business continuity piece is so critical. And as important as that is testing that on a regular basis as well. I think we've all seen, organizations who spend a fortune and put the best plans in place, but when they're sitting at the bottom of a filing cabinet in the basement, and your business has kind of reconfigured and moved on from there, that plan's probably not worth that much. So great insights there. We might move to the next question. So how should organizations manage the risk of unknown fourth-party vendors? These are, created by buyouts or offshoring, those types of scenarios that are not always declared back to your organization. And what is the impact from a SOC perspective, security of critical infrastructure perspective?
I'll be blatant here. Use our combined platform. So it's certainly the Aquila, Lumen, and Secure Forte supply chain risk management platform. But all the the self plug and the kitting aside, organizations do need to map all the way down to their fourth parties now, because what's becoming prevalent even here in Australia, your second or even third parties or your second parties are using pretty much all the same third parties, and your third parties are using pretty much all the same fourth parties in whichever sector, right? So if we look at transport, there's only so many organizations that provide a second, third, fourth. Aviation, medical, or health, I should say. It doesn't matter what sector, there is only a limited number of companies, organizations that are suppliers. And so you have to map out all the way down to fourth party. You have to understand the criticality or the vulnerabilities across that entire ecosystem. And whether you choose to do it in a manual process with the old traditional point in time and the questionnaires or whatever, that's still better than nothing. But at the rate of which things move now, you need a 24/7 monitoring platform that automatically maps out that as well. So there's a number of issues that certainly in Australia we need to consider, and mapping them out with some kind of platform. 24/7 monitoring, your supply chain risk management side of the house is crucial now. You can't do it as the old point in time anymore.
Yeah, CPS 230 has been around for a while, and it's particularly in the financial sector. And I think recently they've just extended it, or last year they've extended it. So I think the deadline is now up. Is for any provider to be serving any organization that needs to be compliant with CPS 230. Would need to be CPS 230 compliant as well. So that's where the chain flows down to third party compliance. For if you're dealing with any financial services as part of critical infrastructure, will need to be compliant and also have a level of resilience. And that goes to show that if any third party were to fail, there needs to be any fourth party were to fail, the third party will need to have recovery mechanisms in place to withstand the blast or any kind of attack or disruption. So yes, there is a flow down, and yeah, we may not be able to control the fourth party, but we can make them accountable, as in perhaps from a contractual side of things. Brad, I don't know whether you agree with that, but I think that's one of the mechanisms we can use.
Yeah, I think the contract is one of the most powerful cybersecurity and risk management tools that an organization has, because you can mandate what actually goes into that contract, and you can do that all the way down to your second, third, fourth parties, and that as well. So no, I very much agree. The contract is a powerful tool that is underutilized by everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a regulatory perspective, and you sort of mentioned CPS 230, 234, you look at the kind of SOC obligations are becoming more and more challenging for organizations to kind of keep up with. And they've only got a certain kind of budget to sort of meet those obligations. So I think looking at a tool or a kind of program that you can put in place to kind of manage a lot of that on your behalf, and give you time to sort of concentrate on your business. Absolutely. All right, we might move to the next question. So as SaaS vendors embed AI features and agents into their products, how should I treat that embedded AI as a distinct supply chain risk vector?
I think this should be treated as obviously we need to put this as a risk item in a risk register, in terms of obviously treating it as a the old term where we coined a shadow IT. Anything that is that you try to set up in your own little cloud instance when a developers goes and does their own thing in this little sandbox. We should actually treat the SaaS vendors with AI features as like that sandbox or that shadow IT, so that we can treat it accordingly with the right amount of controls, right? Not sure whether that rings any kind of thought process with you guys. What do you guys think?
If I'm looking at it from a when we first started where everyone first started to introduce automation into the workplace, whether it was through OT technology or software or, even just automated workflows and things, that was a completely new risk for everybody. Then when we moved to AI, just, generic AI, that was a new risk. And so the treatments that were put in place in there, now we're looking at Agentic AI. It's a new thing of how we actually treat that risk in itself, and particularly in the supply chain risk vector. As we discussed, the use of AI significantly increases your attack surface. It very quickly, whether it identifies or exploits unknown vulnerabilities, is particularly if you don't have that mapping of your ecosystem down pat and updated all the time. Look, I think treating it as a distinct supply chain risk vector, how should it actually do that? As we've talked about, you have to put in place the governance arrangements. You have to have, as you've said, Yang, putting into like that sandpit environment. But it's also just another leap in the processes that we've already gone through since the advent of automated technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just another leap.
I'll say, let's say, company X,
Yeah.
and that's your service provider, and they're using AI agents to collect your information, and through that, that is number one. That's a risk. Obviously, that's an exfiltration, and obviously there needs to be the right amount of controls that's storing your data that you're using their services. Not only that, what is the risk also extends into, because they hold your data right now, and if someone were to go into that environment or poison that environment using prompt engineering, whatever that needs to be done, exfiltrates the data, your data, out of the LLM. So that needs to be treated. So that's why I mentioned about there's this little area that we don't really know about, but we need to treat it as like a shadow IT, which is like a risk. And we need to treat it. Number one, we might need to put some, like you mentioned, governance around it, that we need to control the data that's going up to the SaaS provider, or what kind of assurance that a SaaS provider can then give us from that supply chain.
Yeah, because particularly government organisations, when they're dealing with a SaaS provider, they're now putting in place, and whether it's federal or state, that we're even seeing it down at the local council level, they're not just trusting the black box anymore. They want to know, and it's part of the requirement of signing up or the vendor becoming a supplier is, rightio, we want to know all of the software that you actually have, including any AI agents. We want to know, you are to provide details of what data are you actually capturing, where is it actually being stored, who has the access, and everything like that. So the knowledge of the builds, the knowledge of the storage, making sure that it is compliant with the Australian privacy laws and that as well. And certainly the Privacy Commissioner is having a big say in that. So government is moving down that track of no, we're not just trusting you vendor anymore with the black box. We need to understand where all that's going, and that'll have to be done through contractual arrangements. Is the private sector following suit in something similar? I think it's very hit and miss at the moment. But I think the mechanism that government is taking is probably about the better approach. But yeah, I think I'd be keen to see what you guys are seeing across certainly the private sector. Are organisations, our client organisations, demanding that level of knowledge or transparency with the SaaS providers and that as well.
Yeah, and I think we sort of mentioned before, particularly with internal kind of AI, it's absolutely critical to have a governance model, have a framework for it. I think this is a sort of subset or an extension of that, thinking in the context of AI, thinking in the context of those SaaS providers. What data are they processing? How are they processing it? With what large language models? What security, do they have around that? So I think sitting at the top is that governance model, is that framework. And then sort of out from that is, from a supply chain risk perspective, getting into the detail of how that vendor is using AI. What does that look like? What protections do they have around that? What is their governance model? What is their framework? And what assurances do you have that some rogue agents kind of not going to hoover up a bunch of confidential information and go wild and kind of put it out there? So I think they're definitely all sort of linked, but I think putting them all under that overarching, your own overarching AI governance model, extending that out to what that looks like from a supply chain perspective, and those suppliers that are in fact using AI agents in their own offerings to you as well. Okay, interesting. Next question, please. All right, so we don't have visibility on training model data. How do we get visibility into the AI supply chain model provenance, training data, and fourth-party AI dependencies?
Yeah, this actually ties in with our previous response on that question 5. It's similar to what you've mentioned, John, that there needs to be a governance, and also a level of assurance as well. Let's say from with provider X, how can they give the end users the assurance that the data is, to be transparent, is what Brad said as well, to be transparent, to have the right kind of frameworks, where's the data going, and to give the users some sort of assurance that the data is not being used elsewhere for malicious means. So I think frameworks of 4201 does serve that, the guardrails around it as well. And as well as I think it's very important to also have the likes of SOC 2, the SOC 2 assessments, when they come through, they do, a certain level of due diligence, even red teaming as well into the AI engine that gives us as end users, or even from your supply chain, needs to give you the assurance that it can be as transparent as possible, and the controls are in place to protect your data.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'd add to that, and I agree with the EA, all of these different tools, if we put it, that an organisation now needs to its governance processes, its risk management, automated risk management, monitoring platforms, its cyber platforms, and everything like that. They're all doing their thing, right? But now we've got to bring all of that data together and analysing, like doing a 360-degree analysis or an all-source analysis of all of those different data feeds coming in, so that the client organisation can actually get that full visibility, can actually get the deeper understanding of the risk. And maybe this is a discussion for another for a topic for another webinar, but does the role of, say, the SOC analyst change or evolve to now being a risk and cyber operations analysis center or something like that, where all of these data feeds are actually coming in and they're actually formulating that bigger risk and threat picture, and that way they'll be able to get that visibility on their into the AI supply chain. They'll be able to get all the data that they're after. They'll be able to map out all of the second, third, fourth party dependencies and interdependencies and that as well. So maybe that is something that needs to be looked at in that aspect, is bringing all of this now together, so you can actually view it all through a single pane of glass, so to speak.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, we might move to the next one. If a vendor's AI agent makes a wrong decision, leaks data, or hallucinates into a customer process, who's accountable, and how do I prove I had reasonable controls?
Yeah, so this is actually obviously, like, there are risks, and hallucination and wrong decisions is part of that decision making risk that AI has. And along with that, it comes with a lot of benefits and efficiencies that it provides, and ultimately you can basically contractually enforce your third party or fourth party obligations and get some sort of accountability there. But sadly, the reputation impacts would still remain with you, right? Would still remain with the consumption of the services from the third party or the fourth party. So there needs to be some sort of plan and application of controls around that risk in order to mitigate that reputation damage, right? And that's what I see that we need to be prepared for, right?
Yeah, I mean, and also I think looking at, okay, so we have a client organization and we have a supply chain that goes with it. If the client hasn't put in place the right contractual requirements, hasn't put in place the right governance requirements, hasn't provided the vendors with the right requirements that it needs, and if it's been provided, or if the client organization's been providing the data with rubbish information, like the old adage, crap data in, crap data out, or bad decisions made. Right, so the quality of the information being used for the AI agent to make those decisions, and that as well. So if the client organization hasn't put in place all of those things, then it'd be very, very difficult to allocate the blame. At the end of the day, it would probably be the client organization that would get held accountable by public opinion, whether it's a government or a private sector client. If the right mechanisms have been put in place and these issues still occur, then the vendor is then held accountable for that. But once again, you then also have to take into account the public opinion of that. And how do you prove you had reasonable controls? As we've talked about with a couple of the questions now, as long as you can demonstrate that you had in place the right governance model, the right contractual arrangements, the right identified controls put in place, and that's all documented, and that's all part of, at the end of the day, that what that contract actually has in it as well. And any changes to that contract, the different variants or variations and everything, or contract change proposals and everything. As long as you've got all of that's how you can prove that you had the reasonable controls in place.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, ideally, you've got enough controls in place that you never get to a situation where the vendor's AI agent makes those wrong decisions. And I agree with you, Brad. A contract's a very powerful tool from that perspective, but that's only as good as it is, post some kind of breach or issue or challenge. I mean, ideally, you don't want to get there. It could cost you money. It could be reputational risk and those sorts of things as well. Which is why, again, sort of back to that governance framework, tying that into part of that. And then that platform kind of approach to managing your supply chain risk, real time 24/7. That's why those sorts of things are kind of critical, to proactively defend against some of these challenges. It's unfortunate, and it will happen, that you kind of do get to the point where you're pulling a contract out you're justifying that you had certain reasonable controls. You had commitment from the vendor that they had all the reasonable controls, even though maybe they didn't. By then it may be too late. It's cost you money. It's cost reputational damage, those sorts of things as well. So it is an interesting dilemma. And I think having a look at it from a controls perspective is really sort of tying it back into that kind of governance framework as well. So interesting problem, that's for sure. All right, moving on. So besides controlled identity access management, what are the top 2 actions to consider before onboarding a new vendor?
This is for me it's IDAM is really important, but what we need to also be aware of is the risk that it applies to your environment, the level which sector it's in, or what kind of service it's providing needs to be considered, right? So, and there needs to be also the level of assurance, like when you onboard, like what kind of attestation that they've got, reputation-wise, their attack surface, and what kind of AI tools they're using. So transparency is actually key as well. So along with like your normal, your normal onboarding IDAM process for the third party.
Yeah, if I put it in the context of, so we have some suppliers. Aquila Group has some suppliers. So if I'm looking at it from onboarding a new vendor for us, is the top 2 actions to consider is I actually look at what is their reputation to deliver what I need from them, and then also what are the actual depending on the work that they're going to be doing, what are the actual controls do they actually have in place? And looking at that as well, right? They're probably the 2 things that we look at, and they're probably the 2 things that we get asked by both government and private sector clients, where we're a vendor for. It is, all right, can you deliver this, that what we need from you? Can you provide us with either widget X, or can you develop this strategy or this service? And then if we're talking from a cybersecurity perspective, is right, what are the actual controls that you have in place that meet the standards that we need? Yeah. So the IDM or IAM is actually just one component, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and attestation and all the SOC 2 reviews will actually highlight what the controls you've got in place in order to mitigate the risk. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next question: how do I get true visibility into 4th and beyond parties without drowning my team in alerts?
You can set your tolerance levels. You identify what are the real issues that you're worried about, and map them out. And you categorize, your Pri 1, Pri 2, Pri 3s, or whatever. In regards to your 4th party, what are the real issues that you're concerned about? And sometimes you do have to make the decision to go, anything outside of that, we just let go. If you're talking in regards to a monitoring side of the house, so for example, once again, with the supply chain risk management platform that we collectively have, you can adjust all of the tolerance levels in that. You can just get it adjusted so you can just get the alerting of the actual specific things that you're most concerned about. So there are a range of different options to into that.
I agree. I agree to that. Like, what I'm just augmenting what you said just now with, in terms of threat categorization, right? Obviously, from a sovereign perspective, there are lower threats. Even it's on Australia, you've got Australian analysts, you've got Australian coders, or the people that supplying your services are sovereign, so that's lower risk. And so the threat intelligence and monitoring of that as well, even if from the SOC perspective, right, technically, if you're part of under the SOC Act or Systems of National Significance, you need to get a grasp of who your suppliers are and what kind of data they're exfiltrating out of country. You need to be monitoring that with a with a microscope, and what goes in and what goes out needs to be anomalized, right? So anonymized is what I mean.
Actually, sorry, John, but just to also add in, once again, getting back to the platform that we have, doing it as a managed service. So it's us that actually deals with all the alertings and everything like that. And we analyze, are they real issues or not? With all the data that we collect as part of the managed service for a client. And then we only bring to the client the real issues, the real alerts. So we take care of a lot of the drowning as part of the service, and that then frees up a client's team to do other things. It gives them back time and space for them to focus, and as part of the managed service, we actually deal with all of those alerts and everything like that as well, and working out what are the real ones and what's just all the naff.
Absolutely. All right, we might move to the next question. We've written a third-party incident response plan. How do I let my vendors know what their role is in it?
Oh, look, it depends how you want to approach it. You can co-develop your response plan with your third-party suppliers. They can they help co-develop their part in it. You share your plan with your third parties, and you rehearse it, you practice it, you do training exercises. You do your very, very basic walkthrough, talkthroughs, and then build up over time. Might be throughout the year. You do a few exercises and you build up until you get to the free play, high intensity scenarios and everything like that as well. And you constant communication and refinement of it. So that's how the more mature organisations, once again, whether it's government or private, they actually have the third parties involved in the development, or at least getting information from them. The client organisation drafts up the plan and then shares the relevant parts with them, and then involve them in a number of the training activities as well.
Well said, Brad. And it's like that's coming out of my mouth. Yeah, exactly right. And I know you're an expert in that field as well. Is nothing is better than involving them when it's a hands-on exercise in terms of desktop exercises, making sure that their processes and stakeholders, people move in and out of organizations, there will be gaps. Exercising that plan is the best time to find out what the gaps are and essentially tell them what their role is in this whole process.
Yeah, and remediate any of the gaps.
Yeah,
because like some of the most best performing teams in the world, doesn't matter if it's athletic or special forces or intelligence organizations or anything like that. They always constantly training or refining to make even just the simplest adjustments, but it always improves. And so that's where we should be getting with client organizations and vendors and that as well. And you can have fun with it as well. It doesn't always have to be boring. and just looking at you, each exercise will identify a gap or a vulnerability, and as long as it's taken as the right approach of, okay, no blame, but okay, we've identified an issue. All right, everyone, how do we fix it? All right, okay, done. That's remediated. Let's move on.
Thank you very much, Brad and Yi Yang, and to all the participants on the call today. We do run a number of cyber resilience exercises, and we do these that help leadership teams to validate their readiness. You know, we spoke about the importance of kind of testing your business continuity plan. It's just as important, obviously, to test your cyber systems, resilience processes, people, all of those sorts of things as well, and do it in a safe environment. So if you are looking for such a cyber resilience exercise, we do offer them. We'd be happy to have a conversation around that. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.